incomes in Ireland face a marginal tax rate of 52% of their income, when income tax, USC and PRSI are combined. While those who have lost their jobs have been hit the hardest in recent years, working families have seen significant falls in both their wages and take-home pay. These outcomes impact on competitiveness, are negative for economic growth, and act as a barrier to job creation. Reduced take-home pay also directly affects consumer confidence, with serious consequences for businesses, especially for retailers. We've all seen the impact of this in towns and villages the length and breadth of the country. In each of my previous 3 budgets, we have not increased income tax or universal charge rates, nor have we reduced credits or bans. In my first budget, I exempted 330,000 low-income earners from USC. The government viewed this as the best possible approach to income tax policy for the early phase of our national recovery. As we enter a new phase in the recovery, the progress made over the past 3 years in improving public finances, increasing economic growth and creating jobs means the government can focus on reforming the income tax system in a manner that positively contributes to and strengthens that recovery. These reforms will give confidence about the future and create the opportunity for businesses to grow again. In the summer, the government committed to delivering better living and working standards to our people, developing a considered and focused tax reform plan that reduces the 52% marginal tax rate on low and middle income earners in a manner that maintains the highly progressive nature of the tax system is a key part of this commitment. This will be delivered over a number of budgets. Reform starts today by making it more attractive to return to work, to stay in work, and to ensure that work rewards individuals adequately. My department estimates that a consistent series of reforms along the lines announced today, delivered over a 3-year period, could boost employment levels by as much as 15,000 jobs when the full impact of the changes have taken effect in the economy. To deliver on the plan, I am increasing the entry point to the universal social charge to just above 12,000, removing 80,000 low-income workers from the charge altogether. I am increasing the entry point to the second rate of USC from just over 10,000 to just above 12,000, and the upper ceiling for this band is increasing from just over 16,000 to just above the level of the minimum wage. I am reducing the 2% USC rate to 1.5%. I am reducing the 4% USC rate to 3.5%, and I am increasing the income tax standard rate band by 1,000 to 33,800 for single individuals and by 2,000 for 2 working in a household. Reducing the top rate of income tax, I'm reducing the top rate of income tax from 41% to 40%. I'm introducing a new 8% USC rate for incomes in excess of 70,000 and an 11% rate of USC for self-employed income in excess of 100,000 to limit the benefits of these changes for the top 10% of earners. And I'm retaining the exemption for the top rate of USC for medical card holders earning less than 60,000, and these individuals will now only be liable for a maximum USC rate of 3.5%. This rate of USC is also the maximum that will apply to the over 70s who have incomes lower than 60,000. These changes mean that everyone who currently pays income tax, or USC, or both, will benefit from today's budget changes. For example, a part-time worker earning 12,000 will continue to face no income tax and no USC charge. A minimum wage worker will now face a maximum USC rate of 3.5%. A working family with 3 children, where both parents earn 50,000 each, will have an additional £100 per month, €100 per month in their pocket. But all employees with incomes in excess of 70,000 will continue to face a marginal rate of 52%. These changes enhance the progressivity of our income tax system, with the top 1% of income earners now paying 21% of all income tax and USC collected. In contrast, the bottom 76% of income earners will pay 20% of the total. This is the first instalment of a plan to progressively reduce the 52% rate on low and middle income earners in a manner that maintains the high progressive nature of the Irish tax system. I have set the direction and the parameters for this reform today, and I will follow this approach in next year's budget. And if the government is re-elected, this approach will be followed in the 2017 budget. We will continue to ease the burden. We will continue to ease the burden on those in the middle in a targeted manner, without giving disproportionate benefits to those on highest incomes. The 52% marginal rate will be lowered further while ensuring those on higher incomes continue to pay their fair share. Progressivity will be copper-fastened by giving greater importance to USC at higher incomes, so that the capacity of higher earners to shelter their income through tax breaks is significantly curtailed. I now turn to funding these tax changes which I have announced. The measures I have announced today will cost an estimated $585 million next year, and this cost has to be paid for. So with effect from midnight tonight, the price of 20 cigarettes will increase by 40 cents, with a pro rata increase on other tobacco products.
Sorry, just let us all hear, will you please? Thank you.
This will bring the price of cigarettes in the most popular price category to €10. In addition, a 25-gram pouch of roll-your-own tobacco will increase by a further 20 cents per 25-gram pack. Revenue is also being raised through previously provided for changes in the betting duty and as a result of changes in VAT rules at European Union level. Collectively, the revenue-raising measures in the budget will contribute over $167 million to the Exchequer in the coming year. I'm not raising taxes on alcohol. I'm not raising taxes on petrol. I'm not raising taxes on diesel. I'm not raising motor tax. I'm not raising the vehicle registration tax.
You learned your lesson last weekend.
Actually,
Why do we always have the same voices shouting? Why is it always the same people?
No matter.
Will you proceed, finish?
Actually, I'm not raising any other taxes at all. Because I'm able to fund the costs of these reforms and incentives through improved tax revenues arising from economic growth and expenditure restraint. Both the taxation and expenditure sides of this year's budget are designed to support and broaden the economic recovery that we are now experiencing. Available resources are being carefully targeted on initiatives that will build consumer confidence, support jobs and strengthen demand in the domestic economy. The measures introduced today will put more money into the domestic economy, assist local businesses and retailers, and drive growth right across the country. We as a country have travelled a long road to get to this point. Managing an economy is not just about numbers. Without the support and resilience of the Irish people, our public finances would not be now under control, and our economy would not be growing. I believe this budget is the right approach for Ireland at this point in our recovery. As I have said, we have travelled a long road, and we are now at a very important crossroads. We are now facing a choice. Do we return to the past, unwind the progress and structural reforms made, and pursue boom and bust policies? Or do we look forward and continue to build for a better future with a new economic model? Colleagues will recall Robert Frost's poem, The Road Not Taken, which starts with the line, "Two roads diverge in the yellow wood." The road ahead of us diverges, and we have a choice to make. Do we take the road frequently trodden by Irish governments in the past? A road whose signposts are tax and spend, and where one's journey is through boom to arrive at bust. Deputy, I'll read that again in case you haven't heard it.
No, in fairness, Matty got off the ship.
Do we take the road frequently trodden by Irish governments in the past, a road whose signposts are tax and spend, and where one's journey is through boom to arrive at bust? Or do we, like Frost, take the road less travelled by? A road whose milestones are prudence and caution, a road that delivers stable economic growth, a road that encourages investment, a road that rewards work and creates job opportunities, a road that delivers high-quality public services, a road on which our citizens have certainty about their incomes and can plan for their future without fear of another bust, a new road for a new Ireland. I know the road this government will take. I commend this budget to the House.
I now call on the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform, Deputy Brendan Howland, to make his statement on the estimates without interruption.
Count Corla.
Please.
Today, Michael and I are announcing this government's fourth budget. It's a significant day, and it marks the end of an era of budgetary austerity. This time last year, we estimated that to meet our budget deficit would require further cuts of €1.3 billion on the spending side. That we are now in a position to actually increase expenditure responsibly indicates the progress we have made. To be forced to reduce expenditure for the past 6 years and 7 budgets was unprecedented. It's the scale, Count Corla, of the damage inflicted on the Irish people by Fianna Fáil and government. We now have some flexibility to meet emerging demands and to invest in our public services. This is a further sign that we are normalising both politics and economics following the greatest economic crisis in our history. As the Minister for Finance has indicated, this government's priority is to keep our public finances on a sustainable path to recovery. The spending measures announced today are absolutely consistent with that goal. We're all too well aware of the price to be paid for losing control of our public finances. We know that it's a high one. We committed to bringing our deficit to under 3% of GDP by 2015. Today, Count Corla, we honour that commitment, not just to our European colleagues, but to our own future generations. In fact, as the Minister for Finance has indicated, the deficit target we've set for next year is 2.7% of GDP. But as a government, we've never believed in austerity for austerity's sake. I do not believe that further cuts are necessary. Economic and employment growth have always been the best solution to addressing our fiscal deficit. Of course, arising from our acceptance of the fiscal treaty referendum, our public finances are now governed by the new European fiscal rules. As we pursue our path towards a balanced budget in structural terms, our expenditure growth is limited by the medium-term growth capacity of the Irish economy. Today, Count Corla, I will publish the comprehensive expenditure report, been circulated now to members, setting out expenditure measures for next year, 2015, and departmental expenditure ceilings up to 2017. I will also be publishing later this week background papers on our spending options, including all departmental submissions received as part of the comprehensive review of expenditure. Gross current expenditure for 2015 will be just over 50 billion euros. This figure represents an increase of expenditure of 429 million euros over the 2014 revised estimates. This increase in spending is targeted primarily at critical areas in social protection, in health, in education, in justice, and in housing. It is intended also that current expenditure will rise by further amounts in 2016 and in 2017. The allocations published today contain some increases to meet service pressures that we've identified. There will be further improvements announced next October in line with the government's set priorities. The extent of any such increases will be determined by future economic growth and by the level of progress made towards our medium-term objectives. I'm also pleased to announce an increase of 210 million euros in the capital spending programme for next year. Next year in capital we'll be expending more than 3.5 billion euros. This again will increase further in 2016 and 2017. We are investing in our future, and the detailed capital review setting our priorities right up to 2020 will be published before year-end. This brings the net overall increase in expenditure over last year to 639 million euros. Ceann Comhairle, that's a position 2 billion euros better than we envisaged this time last year. An out-of-control property bubble played a significant role in our economic crash. We've not been able to build enough houses in recent times to meet the demands that has been driven, thankfully, by our economic recovery. We have a supply deficit, which has pushed up prices, particularly in urban areas. This, in turn, has led to a decline in the availability of social and affordable housing, both for purchase and for rent. The government is committed to addressing this social problem. The Minister for the Environment has proposed a number of measures in the recently announced planning bill and will shortly elaborate on government's social housing strategy for 2015 to 2020. These measures are complemented by the announcements just made by the Minister for Finance to stimulate wider housing supply. The government is determined to meet the scale of social housing with a level of investment commensurate to the scale of the challenge we face. Our strategy involves a multi-annual approach to significantly increasing the provision of social housing, combining a considerable increase in exchequer investment with innovative approaches to improve supply. For Ceann Comhairle, I'm announcing an overall capital investment of over 2.2 billion euros for social housing provision for the next 3 years. This will involve 3 main strands. Firstly, over 1.5 billion euros will be directly invested by the Exchequer between now and 2017. Secondly, public-private partnerships will be used to invest a further 300 million in social housing units by 2017. And thirdly, an off-balance sheet vehicle, financial vehicle, will provide at least 400 million more from 2015 onwards to approved housing bodies. Turning specifically to next year, I'm allocating over 800 million euros for the housing programme in 2015. Over 450 million of this will be for capital investment. This represents the first major investment in housing made by a government since 2009. Further measures will be taken in 2016 and 2017, with allocations of 500 million and 600 million respectively for those years for social housing capital. This capital investment will deliver an additional 2,500 housing units next year, and over 6,700 housing units by 2017. Well, as I've said, Ceann Comhairle, as well as increasing direct exchequer investment, we also need to explore off-balance sheet approaches to delivering on this urgent social need. The first approach is to develop public-private partnerships. These are not the land swap deals between local authorities and developers, which so obviously failed in the last regime. We are going to adopt the successful model that we've developed over recent years that has delivered 23 schools in a time of very limited resources. The firm objective from this measure is to deliver a further 1,500 housing units by 2017. The second non-exchequer approach is to set up an off-balance sheet financial vehicle to channel investment funds to the voluntary housing sector. This will operate on an independent commercial basis to provide financing to approved housing bodies. The financial investment vehicle would be open to both private investors and bodies like the European Investment Bank. We've already had discussions with them. It is the intention of the government that 400 million euros of public investment will be available, including from the proceeds of the sale of Bord Gas energy business. This will leverage private finance and provide at least another 2,000 housing units over the period 2016 to 2018. The government believes, Ceann Comhairle, that it is entirely appropriate that the disposal of one state asset should finance a different state asset which meets an urgent social need. Overall, this large-scale investment will fund the provision of well in excess of 10,000 housing units between now and 2018. In addition to capital funding, the introduction of the housing assistance payment will support the social housing needs of 8,000 households. An additional 3,000 households will be housed by local authorities through the leasing of houses next year. I'm also pleased to announce, Ceann Comhairle, an additional 10 million euros will be provided for accommodation and related services for homeless persons. This will increase the annual expenditure for tackling homelessness to 55.5 million euros next year. This goes beyond the government's existing commitment to maintain expenditure at the 2013 level of 45 million euros to 2016. Unemployment is falling faster than almost anyone else and anywhere else in the EU. It now stands at just over 11%, down from a high of 15.1% in early 2012. We expect it to fall to 10.2% in 2015. And I should say that we have created 76,600 net new jobs. And the number of people now at work is as high as it was pre-boom in 2009. Unemployment, Ceann Comhairle, is still too high, but the employment support measures we've introduced are paying dividends. In 2015, 1.6 billion euros will be made available to support approximately 300,000 work and training places in support of the Pathways to Work strategy. This will help people acquire the skills necessary to compete for the jobs that are now being created in this economy. 12 million euros has been allocated for the Jobs Path initiative next year. This will match the long-term unemployed with appropriate training and employment opportunities to get back to work. We're doubling the number of positions to 6,000 for the long-term unemployed and the government's wage subsidy scheme, Jobs Plus. As set out in the government strategy of priorities, and to ensure that the benefit of recovery is felt by all workers, we are establishing a low-pay commission next year. The capital allocation of 450 million, you think that's funny, of course, 450 million for the Department of Jobs, Enterprise and Innovation next year will ensure continued strong support for job creation. and for enterprise supports, with a focus on building on our recent strong export performance. Another critical component underpinning future growth in jobs is sustained investment in research, development and innovation. The combined research and development funding position for Enterprise Ireland and Science Foundation Ireland next year is over €260 million, and this will enable us to leverage significant new funding opportunities externally from industry partners and from the European Union. Economic recovery without a commensurate social recovery is obviously not an end in itself. To that end, Ceann Comhairle, I'm allocating €19.4 billion to social protection next year. I'm pleased to be able to tell the House today that next year will be the first year since 2009 when there will be no cuts to social welfare schemes. We are determined that economic recovery...
Sorry, just settle down.
We are determined, Ceann Comhairle.
There's no need to be helping them over here, will you? Just stay quiet, thank you.
We are determined that economic recovery should be and will be accompanied by social recovery. Getting people back to work remains this government's #1 priority. A new back-to-work family dividend will be introduced to provide an additional incentive for families to move from welfare to work. This will allow families to retain the full qualified child increase of €29.80 per child per week for 12 months after they return to work, and 50% of the payment in the second year following return to work. This government succeeded in protecting basic social welfare rates for the last 3 budgets in the most difficult of times. Now that recovery is taking hold, I believe it's important that the limited scope that we have is used to alleviate the pressures faced by those most under pressure in our society. I'm pleased to announce that we will increase the rate of child benefit by €5 per child from January next. Provide circumstances allow, Ceann Comhairle, we will increase child benefit again in 2016 by a further €5. We are increasing the rate of living alone allowance to €9 per week, benefiting almost 180,000 elderly people, again from next January. These are the first rate increases to be applied for social welfare since 2009, when the economy was collapsed by the previous administration. The outturn figures for unemployment for this year, 2014, are much better than forecast. The government has decided to allocate a portion of these live register savings to pay a 25% bonus to social welfare recipients this coming Christmas. This is a current year payment from 2014 figures. Whether a similar bonus will be paid next year will again depend on the availability of sufficient savings in next year's social protection vote. The establishment of Irish Water is a necessary measure to put the provision of this critical resource on a long-term sustainable footing. Securing a quality water supply, as everybody in this House knows, is a critical feature both for individual families and for the businesses that rely on quality water for jobs. But the government recognises that this measure is the last in a series of measures that have imposed burdens on the Irish people. To that end, we are determined to alleviate, Ceann Comhairle, this burden. My colleague, the Minister for Finance, has already announced a new tax allowance to reduce the water burden on working families. To complement that move, I can confirm a new water subsidy worth €100 per annum for all recipients of the household benefits package, as previously announced. In addition, this is being expanded to include all recipients of the free fuel allowance schemes who are not already covered by the household benefits package. This will benefit 653,000 households in this country who will see their water bill reduced by €100 to mirror the allowance available to taxpayers announced by the Minister for Finance.
Stay quiet, please. Stay quiet.
All of these social protection measures will cost 190. All these measures will cost 100.
Sorry, would you please stay quiet and allow the Minister? There's hundreds of thousands of people at home who'd like to hear them. Not you lot in here who want to shout them down. So please, would you stay quiet? Thank you.
Thank you, Giancarlo. All of these social protection measures will cost €196 million next year, and again will be funded in the fall in the live register, getting people back to work, the most successful outcome of the policies pursued by this government. This is a real social dividend, delivered by the policies we progressed. Matty, 1.91 million people at work, higher than when you abandoned Fianna Fáil.
Minister, really.
The Taoiseach will provide more details on the full range of social protection measures later. This government continues to recognise health as a key priority and will provide €13.1 billion for the delivery of health services next year. In 2015, over 2.1 million people, nearly half the population, will have either a medical or a GP visit card. This includes our extension of GP coverage to the under 6s and to the over 70s. We will provide additional staff so that patients can access mental health services such as psychologists and counsellors in the primary care setting. I'm providing an additional €25 million to deal with delayed discharges in hospitals. I'm allocating over €3 billion to support older people and disabled services next year, and €2.3 billion for prescription drugs. Giancarlo, I want to pay particular tribute to our hospital services and to the people working in them. This government prioritises these key services. And I'd remind the House that the number of people working in hospitals has remained at 2011 levels of over 48,000 people, despite much increased demands on their services. The additional funding being provided today will ensure the continued provision of core services and enable delivery of programme for government commitments to further enhance health and well-being of our people. Further details will be provided by my colleague, the Minister for Health, later today. I am allocating €8.3 billion to education for education current expenditure in 2015. I can confirm that there will be no increase in class sizes, there will be no reduction in the number of teachers or special needs assistants. On the contrary, next year will see more than 1,700 additional new full-time posts. This is comprised of 920 new mainstream teachers, 480 new resource teachers, and 365 additional special needs assistants. I'm also allocating €530 million to education for capital expenditure. I think it's worth noting, Ceann Comhairle, that in the lifetime of this government, over 150 new schools will have been built, together with large-scale extensions or improvements of a further 100 schools. At third level, we've seen the completion of the first phase of the new Grange Gorman campus at the Dublin Institute of Technology. I would like, Ceann Comhairle, to briefly outline some further measures. €2.2 billion will be allocated to the justice sector. This will allow for the future recruitment of more Gardaí. As my colleague, the Minister for Justice, will outline later, this funding will also support the Justice Reform Programme. This programme includes plans for the reform of An Garda Síochána, the strengthening of the remit of GSOC, the establishment of a new independent policing authority, the Court of Appeal, the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission, and the establishment of the Charities Regulatory Authority. €975 million will be allocated to children and youth affairs. This will support the new Child and Family Agency, TUSLA, in its delivery of integrated and effective services, including the improvement of residential and foster care services. A capital allocation of €35 million will be used to support additional and improved child detention services. The Minister for Children and Youth Affairs will provide further details of these plans again later today. Next year will see an increase in the agricultural vote to over €1 billion. The Minister for Agriculture will use this to support the Rural Development Programme, the Seafood Development Programme, the Food Harvest 2020 Plan, and the innovative Beef Data and Genomics Programme. Funding will also support the implementation of the report of the Commission for the Economic Development of Rural Areas. I am committed to ensuring that the benefits of our economic revival are shared right across the country. In this context, Ireland has secured €1.2 billion in structural funds for the period 2014-2020. This represents an increase of 8% over the previous 7-year period and includes a special allocation of €100 million for the Border, Midlands and West region. This funding will be delivered through operational programmes co-financed by the Irish Government, the European Social Fund and the European Regional Development Fund, with a combined value of just over €2 billion. The Government was also successful, Ceann Comhairle, in securing additional funding for a new peace programme for the border counties of Ireland and Northern Ireland. Along with its sister Interreg programme, it will form part of a package of funding worth in excess of €500 million for the region over the next 7 years. The Government attaches a high priority to these cross-border programmes, and I am pleased to say that draft programmes have now been submitted to the European Commission by the Government in partnership with the Northern Ireland Executive. Ireland has a very strong record in the area of international development. It has been recognised across the world that we have maintained our engagement in the fight against global poverty and hunger, even in the face of extraordinary economic difficulty at home. Our aid programme prioritises some of the poorest countries in sub-Saharan Africa. Next year, some €476 million is being provided through the international cooperation vote of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Combined with our share of the EU development cooperation vote and contributions from other government departments, this will bring our overall official development assistance to some €600 million next year. This level of funding will enable Ireland to play a critical role in some of the most pressing humanitarian crises witnessed by generations. For instance, we have taken the lead in providing €14 million this year alone for the victims of the appalling conflict in Syria and in its neighbouring regions. We provide €10 million annually to support the Palestinian people, and Minister Flanagan at the International Conference in Cairo at the weekend pledged €2.5 million for the reconstruction of Gaza. We are one of a small number of European countries with an embassy in Sierra Leone, a partner country for our aid programme. Through the Irish aid programme in both Sierra Leone and Liberia, and our funding of NGOs throughout West Africa, we are currently providing €16 million in developing assistance, much of which is focused on strengthening health systems, but also on directly fighting the Ebola outbreak. I am announcing an increased allocation of €212 million for arts heritage, an increased allocation of €212 million for arts heritage in the Gaeltacht next year. This will be used to sustain the work of the Arts Council and to support our important cultural institutions and the Irish language. I am also allocating €61 million in capital expenditure in this area. As well as investing in our future, funding has been provided for a programme of commemoration projects related to the social and political developments of the decade from 1912, which helped to form modern Ireland. The Minister for Arts, Heritage and the Gaeltacht will provide details later today. I am happy, Ceann Comhairle, to confirm continued investment in critical defence funding with an allocation of €885 million. The Minister for Defence will use this funding to prioritise naval service vessel renewal. Funding will also allow continued participation in overseas peace support operations. I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the dedication and commitment of our defence forces, both at home and representing Ireland with such distinction abroad, particularly as we've witnessed in recent times. These are just a few of the measures that we set out in detail in the comprehensive expenditure report before the House. Service reform remains at the heart of the government's agenda and will focus on ensuring efficiency and improving outcomes for service users. That's every citizen in the country. Investment in public services will be targeted at priority areas and will be linked closely with reform. This government is not going to allocate resources to services that are unreformed. The cost savings delivered through the government's reform programme are being used to support priority frontline services, as I've just set out. Public service numbers have been reduced by 10% since 2008. I'm pleased to announce that there will be no further overall reductions. An important part of the reform agenda is greater autonomy for departments and agencies to manage their own staffing levels. From next year, I'm pleased to announce that departments will have discretion over staffing levels within the agreed overall pay framework. In tandem with the announcements I've made regarding additional Gardaí, teachers and so on next year, we will also see a resumption of recruitment into the civil service. We need to provide opportunities for people to enter employment in our public services. I also intend to launch the new civil service renewal in the coming weeks. This marks an end of the moratorium of recruitment, but in a targeted and in a focused way. Ceann Comhairle, I concluded my estimates address 2 years ago by saying that the Irish people would, in time, be proud of our collective national response to the biggest economic crisis in our independent history. The improving economic statistics are proof of that response. They're a tribute to the Irish people. Not everything is mended. Not everything is yet as it should be. We still have a way to go, but our collective achievement in the face of adversity is a considerable one. There remains challenges ahead, but discipline, hard won, will not be jeopardised. Irish people will not thank anybody who forgets and repeats the mistakes of the past. As we enter a new era in Irish history, that is this government's commitment to the people of Ireland.
I now call on the spokesperson for Fianna Fáil.
Thank you very much.
Could I ask these members, please respect the deputy who's about to speak. Thank you. If you wish to leave, I'd suggest maybe just take a moment when we get them out, those who want. Yeah. Sorry, would you please leave if you're leaving quickly? Thank you. I'm sorry,
Next year. I know it happened long left, but...
Sorry, Deputy.
You're a visionary, Ceann Comhairle, you're a visionary.
Sorry, would you please respect the Speaker, and thank you. No talking in the galleries, please. Thank you. Leave the chamber if you're leaving. Thank you.
You're invincible. Ceann Comhairle, that's part of the problem we have. The government of today does not respect the opposition. Minister, this budget is all about using borrowed money to buy votes. The headline element of your budget today is your income tax proposals. That's the headline measure, Minister, your income tax proposals. And having decided to go down the road of income tax, I honestly believe you have made a mess of it. And let me give you a number of examples, Minister. We've heard all the rhetoric that this would be the budget to reduce the burden on low and middle income families. An individual working full-time, earning €32,000 a year, is going to benefit from your income tax package by €174 a year. €174 a year, Minister. The same individual, Minister, will of course now be facing water charges of €200, €300, €400. Who knows? That individual is certainly worse off as a result of this budget.
Sorry, Deputy. Listen, I asked for silence when the Minister was making his contribution. I now ask for silence from the opposition deputies, please. We do live in a democracy, in case you've forgotten about it. Thank you. Yes, thank you.
You see, we have to listen to you. You see, Kieran Corley, this is part of the problem we have, because this government is completely intolerant of any criticism, of any debate about its measures. It believes it is invincible. Well, I can tell you this much, you're not invincible. I am standing here on this side of the House with a mandate to represent people and to question your budget. And I will do so based on facts and based on fairness. So please show a little bit of respect, not to me, but to the people I represent, and listen to what I have to say. The headline package in your income tax proposal, Minister, in your budget, is your income tax proposal. I gave the first example. An individual earning €32,000 a year is better off to the tune of €174 per annum, before we even talk about water charges. In contrast, an individual earning €70,000 a year will benefit to the tune of €746 a year, 4 times greater. Take the example of a couple on one income, Minister, an income of less than €41,800 a year. They too will benefit by €174. That's an average couple, Minister. One of them working, the other one staying at home to mind the kids. The tax benefit that you're giving to them is €174 a year, more than wiped out by the water charges that you're introducing. So let's be honest about what this budget is really about. In contrast, if you have a two-income couple, both earning €70,000 a year, because the universal social charge is calculated on an individual basis, as you know. Combining the gain on USC, the expansion of the low rate band and the cut to the marginal rate of tax, they will be up by about €1,500 a year. Now, I have to say, Minister, that your tax proposals are very unfair, not just on low-income families, but especially on families where one parent decides to stay at home. You're not extending the low rate band by €2,000, you're extending it by just €1,000 for a couple, the same as you are for an individual. That is fundamentally unfair. When I heard last night about an email that the Taoiseach sent to her Labour Party colleagues, it said something like, the budget would mainly benefit low and middle income earners, working families and vulnerable groups. You wouldn't get that propaganda in North Korea, Taoiseach. I honestly thought that Kim Jong-un had come out of exile to write an email to the Labour Party. That is how misleading it actually was. This Fine Gael Labour government in Ceann Comhairle has decided to fire the first shot today in their general election campaign, and in doing so have proved that they have learned nothing from the crisis that we have just come through. This is a budget straight from the book of old school politics, a budget that is more about short-term political gain than what is right for the economy and our people. But it is also a budget that exposes very clearly this government's flawed priorities. At the first opportunity and the first sign of a recovery, the government's priority is not to undo some of the social harm caused by 6 tough years of austerity, but instead to design tax cuts that disproportionately put far more money in the pockets of higher income earners. That, for me, speaks volumes about where this government's priorities lie. We all know this government's first 3 budgets were deeply regressive, hitting low and middle income families the hardest and leaving the highest income earners in the country off virtually scot-free. When this government cut the respite care grant, cut supports for special needs children and abolished the telephone allowance, no corresponding sacrifice was required by those who had the most. The government is now borrowing money to give a tax cut which will give by far and away the greatest benefit to the better off, and which everyone else will have to repay with interest. That is what is happening. This is the government's first budget since the end of the EU-IMF agreement. This budget gives us a clear sense of this government's lack of priorities. There is no vision for what a post-austerity Ireland will look like, no statement of our values as a people, no talk of fairness or social solidarity, and most depressingly of all, no indication that the mistakes of the past will not be repeated. The government's promise of an end to boom and bust policies rings as hollow as the promise to abolish the prescription charge, the promise to give free GP care to all, and the promise not to increase student fees. People have sacrificed too much for the recovery to be put in jeopardy. Ceann Comhairle, this is a government that took medical cards off the sick, the dying and the disabled until they were shamed into giving them back. This is a government that broke promise after promise after promise in the hope that people would just stop noticing. This is a government that promised an end to cronyism, but instead brought it to a new level. This is a government that delivers income tax cuts for the better off, but abandons the homeless and those crying out for mental health supports. This is a government that deliberately targeted single parents, women, vulnerable elderly people and young people out of work. This is a government that promised us new politics. Well, I think we all know what happened to that. Prior to coming to office, Fine Gael and Labour opposed every measure designed to close the budget deficit, but they now claim 100% of the credit for the job that was two-thirds done for them. The simple fact is this government is now aiming for a deficit that is higher than what it would be if you did nothing today. The opening position for next year is forecasting a deficit of 2.4%, but you're planning to bring that up to 2.7%. Staying the course has been roundly defeated by political expediency and the imperative of the next election. Ceann Comhairle, there is something very disturbing about the way the Independent Irish Fiscal Advisory Council has been treated by this government. And anyone listening to John McHale, the chairman today on Morning Ireland, would really have sat up and taken notice. It's not that I agree with everything that they have said, but I have taken what they have said into account in a genuine way. This government has ignored time and again the independent advice of that council without giving an adequate explanation for doing so. The council advising €2 billion of an adjustment, the government is going in the other direction to the tune of about €1 billion. That is the reality, Minister, and you can shake your head. Instead, Ministers Noonan and Howlin have launched the lifeboat to try to save as many backbench Labour and Fine Gael seats as possible in the next 18 months. We in Fianna Fáil welcome the recent improvement in the economy. There is a recovery taking place. The positive economic data has given people hope that the pain they endured continues to be worthwhile. I know you don't like what I'm saying, and that's why you're heckling. You're trying to drown out what I'm saying. Both ministers were afforded a lot of respect by the opposition, and you're not affording the same respect to us. So, Ceann Comhairle, the economic upturn has happened very quickly. Last year we had hardly any economic growth at all, and the same the previous year. So we make no apologies for urging a degree of caution. In our view, it is time to take a deep breath, to secure the recovery, to assess the real risks, especially external risks, that this country is still facing, and address gaps in vital public services which have opened up in recent years. Any spare resources need to be targeted at those who really need it, and those who have borne the brunt of budget cutbacks in recent times. Up to a few weeks ago, the government was predicting modest growth of 2% this year. Now, a raft of positive economic data emerged in very quick succession, not foreseen by this government either, by the way, and it has resulted in the prediction now that the economy will grow by about 5%. In our view, we would be in a much better position and have a much clearer set of data in about 12 months' time as to the real state of the Irish economy, the public finances and indeed the international outlook. And I think you actually know that, Minister Noonan, yourself. But of course the imperative of electoral politics has kicked in. Or as one minister put it in his weekend newspaper, we may not get another budget, he or she anonymously said. In other words, this is the election to spend the money and try to save as many seats as we can. Well, Minister, we in Fianna Fáil are taking a different approach, and for the first time in decades, decades, because you didn't do it in opposition. There is an opposition party prepared to stand back and show the courage to advocate responsible politics rather than popular politics, which you are promoting. In opposition, Fine Gael and Labour were cheerleaders for cutting taxes and raising spending. In fact, you were insatiable with your demands during the Celtic Tiger years. Fianna Fáil has learned from the mistakes of the past. This government is about to repeat them. Let me say this, Minister, auction politics was wrong in the past and it is wrong now. We need to accept that this country still faces key risks, many of them external, as I have said. The Eurozone economy is flagging, as you well know. Economic indicators in Germany are deteriorating rapidly. France is seeking 2 further years to bring its deficit into line, and the serious problems in Greece are resurfacing again. The historic low interest rates enjoyed by this state for borrowing will not last indefinitely. The forecast for world growth has been downgraded, and regional conflicts always have the capacity to cause economic instability. Ireland is indeed a small, open economy which relies heavily on external trade. We are, more than most, at the mercy of external factors, but that doesn't seem to have figured too much in your consideration. That is why the recovery should have been allowed to take its first breath before we start giving away the money which you are borrowing to do. We do know some things about the recovery, though, Minister. The recovery has not spread right around the country. And for many people, indeed, the word recovery is absolutely meaningless. If you have a child with special needs awaiting an assessment of need, or seeking access to speech and language therapy or occupational therapy, there is no recovery for you. If you are an elderly person who cannot afford to pay private health insurance and you're waiting for a knee operation, there is absolutely no recovery for you. If you have a loved one waiting to gain access to a nursing home, waiting 4 months now for funding under the Fair Deal scheme, hanging on by their fingertips at home with threadbare support from the state, there is no recovery for you. And if you are a homeless person sleeping not 200 yards from the gate of this stall, there is absolutely no recovery for you. Taoiseach, there are bigger questions to answer. What are we about as a people? What do we really stand for? What are our priorities? And people look to you, Taoiseach, for vision. Anyone listening to you over the last number of months would say that your vision is to cut the marginal rate of tax, which will benefit 1 in 6 income earners. A consultant orthopaedic surgeon went on Liveline last week and said that in the National Orthopaedic Hospital, all 7 operating theatres are closed because the HSE cannot afford to buy the hip replacements. Is that the country that we're living in today? All the while, waiting list spiral, and this government's top priority is to cut the marginal rate of tax. Well, I think it says a lot about the choices which you have made, and people will in time see through those choices, because there is an innate decency in the Irish people. We saw it with the medical cards fiasco over the last couple of years. Even people who weren't affected by what your government did, the unintended consequence of putting €113 million into your budget to save from medical cards, which resulted in people losing medical cards, which you say was never meant to happen. There was a decency in people. Even though they weren't affected, it hit them hard. And that's what people will see in the choices that you have made. That is why we, as a party, have said that extra resources should be made available to areas where a real difference can be made at this time. Improving access to childcare, especially for people looking to access work. Building on the free preschool year introduced by Fianna Fáil, reducing class sizes for our children, which we know gives better educational outcomes and which is the best long-term investment that we can make in this country and indeed our economy. Prioritising mental health and suicide awareness. Looking after vulnerable people who are older and who need supports at this time, to name but a few priorities. Increasing mortgage interest relief for those who are drowning under the burden of high mortgages, especially those on variable interest rates. Deputy Fleming will speak about a number of those areas in more detail in a moment. Minister, a few weeks ago you gave all the credit to the government for the recovery. The truth is, Minister, that apportioning credit for a recovery that most people do not see is really of little consequence. And it says more about the insecurity of this government than anything else. In my view, the economic progress which has been made can be attributed to a number of factors, not least the reduction in the budget deficit, a process which, as you well know, started back in 2008. And it is a fact you may not welcome, but a fact nonetheless, that Fianna Fáil in government, your predecessor in your office, the late Brian Lenihan, introduced 2/3 of the budget adjustment, which has been central to our recovery. But above all else, and Minister Howlin alluded to this, the sacrifices of the Irish people have brought us to the point where there is now clear light at the end of the tunnel. As we know on income tax, the government in recent times tried to dampen down the very expectations that it had